The morning shift at Xenological Research Station Epsilon 7 began like any other in the past 5 years. Dr. Crixtal adjusted her protective gear for the third time, checking each seal with the careful precision that had kept her alive through countless encounters with the galaxy's most dangerous specimens. The station housed over 3,000 species from across the known universe, each more lethal than the last. But none required the same level of security as the creatures in Section 13. The warning signs were impossible to miss. Red holographic barriers pulsed every few seconds, accompanied by a low hum that seemed designed to burrow into the mind of any sentient being. The text appeared in 47 different languages, but Crixtal had memorized the standard galactic version long ago. Extreme danger, species 847 Terra, authorized personnel only, lethal force approved for containment breach. Crixtal had studied the creatures for 3 years now, and she still felt her 4 hearts skip beats whenever she approached their enclosure. The humans, as they called themselves, looked deceptively harmless. Bipedal mammals with soft, unprotected skin and no visible natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no armor plating, no toxic secretions. To an untrained eye, they appeared almost pathetically vulnerable. That was the first mistake every species made about them. The second mistake was assuming their technology was their greatest weapon. The humans did possess frightening military capabilities. Their ships could destroy entire worlds, their soldiers fought with mechanical precision, and their strategic minds had outmaneuvered every major power in the galaxy during the Terran Wars. But those weren't the reasons they were kept in Section 13. The third mistake, and the most dangerous one, was thinking you understood what made them truly terrifying. Morning report, Crixtal announced into her communication device as she approached the central observation platform. Around her, 24 other researchers prepared their equipment for another day of careful study. Each wore the same protective gear she did, environmental suits that would protect them from chemical attacks, electromagnetic pulses that could disable their nervous systems, and kinetic barriers that could stop projectiles moving at near light speed. All specimens accounted for, came the reply from Dr. Velnoon, the station's chief xenobiologist. His voice carried the same tension it had for the past 5 years. 17 adults, 12 adolescents, 4 juveniles. The new acquisition arrived last night. Crixtal paused. New acquisition? Human child. Age approximately 3 standard years. Found on the debris of a destroyed colony ship near the outer rim. Only survivor. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Human children were even less understood than their adult counterparts. The few previous specimens had been kept in maximum isolation after several incidents. The research team had learned that young humans possess certain capabilities that developed into their more recognizable and feared traits as they matured. Where is it being housed? Crixtal asked, though she dreaded the answer. Isolation Pod 7 Alpha. Full separation protocol. We've learned our lesson about keeping human young in proximity to other species. Crixtal nodded grimly. 3 years ago, a human child had somehow convinced a Vraxian death warrior, a species bred specifically for combat and incapable of showing mercy, to share its food rations. The warrior had begun exhibiting what the humans called protective behavior and had to be terminated when it started attacking researchers who approached the human cell. The incident had led to 17 new protocols and a complete revision of containment procedures for human juveniles. She made her way through the security checkpoints, each more elaborate than the last. Biometric scanners, psychological profile analyzers, and, finally, the neural dampening field that was supposed to protect against the human's most dangerous ability. The field made her thoughts feel sluggish and her emotions muted, but it was a small price to pay for protection against what the research team had classified as empathic weaponization. The main observation deck provided a clear view into the human enclosure through 6-inch thick transparent aluminum. The space was designed to mimic their natural environment: open grasslands with artificial trees, a climate-controlled atmosphere, and carefully maintained living quarters. To an outside observer, it might have looked comfortable, even pleasant. But Crixtal knew better. Every plant had been tested to ensure it couldn't be weaponized. Every structure was built to contain beings capable of utilizing tools with frightening creativity. The very air was filtered and monitored to prevent the humans from developing biological weapons from common materials. She spotted the new arrival immediately. The tiny human sat alone near the center of the enclosure, no larger than her forearm. Its pale skin was marked with the dirt and debris of its traumatic rescue, but it showed no signs of the psychological damage that would have destroyed most species after such an ordeal. Instead, it was watching the adult humans with an expression that made Krikstal's blood run cold. Curiosity. Pure, innocent curiosity. Dr. Krikstal, came a voice behind her. She turned to see Dr. Velnoon approaching, his 8 legs carrying him across the observation deck with practiced efficiency. His species, the Theknari, were known throughout the galaxy for their analytical minds and emotional distance. It was why he had been chosen to lead the human research project. The child's behavioral patterns are already concerning, he continued, gesturing toward the viewing window with one of his secondary arms. It's been attempting to establish contact with the adult specimens for the past 6 hours. Krikstal looked back at the small human. As she watched, it stood on unsteady legs and began walking toward a group of adult humans who sat near the artificial water source. They had been observing the child as well, and she could see the same expression on their faces that she had learned to fear above all others. Recognition. They're accepting it into their social group, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Even though it's not genetically related to any of them. Precisely, Dr. Velnoon replied. This confirms our hypothesis about human pack bonding behavior. They form emotional attachments not based on kinship, survival benefit, or logical advantage. They simply choose to care for one another. The implications were staggering. Most species formed alliances based on mutual benefit, territorial proximity, or genetic similarity. The idea of a species that could form genuine emotional bonds with completely unrelated individuals was not just alien, it was strategically terrifying. Krikstal watched as the adult humans surrounded the child, not in a threatening manner, but in what she had learned to recognize as protective positioning. One of them, a female with dark skin and kind eyes, knelt down and spoke to the child in soft tones. The child responded by reaching out with tiny hands, and the female allowed the contact. They're going to adopt it, Krikstal said, her voice filled with scientific fascination and instinctive dread. A completely unknown child from a destroyed settlement, possibly carrying diseases or genetic incompatibilities, and they're simply going to accept it as their own. This is why they're classified as level Omega threats, Dr. Velnoon reminded her. Not because of their weapons or their technology, but because of their incomprehensible behavior patterns. How do you fight an enemy that will sacrifice themselves for total strangers? How do you predict the actions of a species that makes decisions based on emotion rather than logic? The humans in the enclosure were now sharing their food with the child, despite having limited rations. The child was eating eagerly, seemingly unaware that it was participating in one of the most feared behavioral patterns in the galaxy. Human pack bonding had been responsible for some of the most devastating military defeats in galactic history. Entire armies had been destroyed because they underestimated the lengths humans would go to for their chosen family members. Dr. Krikstal, another voice called from across the observation deck. She turned to see Dr. Zephyra, the station's security chief, approaching with obvious concern. Her species, the Quartani, were natural pessimists, but her expression suggested something beyond normal caution. We have a problem, Dr. Zephyra announced. The other specimens in adjacent sections are showing unusual activity patterns. Increased vocalizations, aggressive posturing, and territorial displays. It started approximately 6 hours ago. Krikstal felt ice forming in her veins. 6 hours ago? When the human child arrived? Precisely. We believe they're responding to the child's presence, despite being housed in completely separate sections with no possible sensory contact. The 3 researchers exchanged glances that spoke volumes. This was new. This was completely unprecedented. And if there was one thing their years of human research had taught them, it was that unprecedented human behavior was invariably dangerous. What species are showing the response? Dr. Velnoon asked, his voice carefully controlled. All of them, Dr. Zephyra replied. Every single specimen in sections 10 through 16. The Vraxian Death Warriors are pacing their cells. The Stellar Mantids are building defensive structures. The Void Hunters have stopped feeding entirely. Even the crystalline hive minds are resonating at frequencies we've never recorded before. Krikstal stared back at the human enclosure, where the child was now being gently washed by 2 of the adult humans while others stood guard. The scene looked like nothing more than a family caring for their youngest member. But she knew better. She knew that what she was witnessing was the activation of the most dangerous survival mechanism in the known galaxy. "They're protecting something that isn't even their own species' offspring," she said, her voice filled with the kind of awe usually reserved for natural disasters. "And, somehow, every predator in adjacent sections can sense the threat that represents." Dr. Valnoon was already activating his communication device. Security Alert Level 7. Begin immediate reinforcement of all containment protocols. Double the guard rotations and implement full isolation procedures between sections. "Sir," Dr. Zephyra interjected, "with respect, I don't think isolation is going to be effective. Whatever is happening here, it's not limited by our physical barriers." Crixtal nodded grimly. "She's right. We're dealing with something beyond our current understanding. The humans aren't just protecting one child, they're demonstrating to every sentient being in range that they will protect any child. Any vulnerable individual. Any being they perceive as needing their help. And that terrifies every other species in the facility, Dr. Valnoon concluded, because they recognize what it means." The three scientists stood in silence, watching as the human child, completely unaware of the chaos its mere presence was causing, curled up to sleep surrounded by its new guardians. In a few hours, the other ships would arrive, and they would have to explain that a 3-year-old human had somehow managed to destabilize their most secure facility simply by existing. "Dr. Crixtal," Dr. Valnoon said quietly, "I want you to prepare a full report for the Galactic Council. They need to understand what we're seeing here." "What exactly am I supposed to tell them?" she asked. "That humanity's greatest weapon is a 3-year-old child? That their most terrifying characteristic is their capacity for unconditional love?" "Tell them the truth," Dr. Valnoon replied, his voice grim. "Tell them that we've been studying the wrong thing this entire time. We've been trying to understand human weapons, human technology, human strategy. But their real power, the thing that makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy, is their absolute refusal to abandon anyone they've chosen to protect." Crixtal looked back at the sleeping child, now peacefully resting in the arms of a human who had never seen her before 6 hours ago, surrounded by others who were willing to die to keep her safe. "And tell them," Dr. Valnoon continued, "that we finally understand why every military engagement with humans has ended the same way. It's not because they're stronger, faster, or more intelligent than us. It's because they fight with the absolute certainty that losing means abandoning the people they love. And, for humans, that's simply not an option they're willing to consider." The observation deck fell silent except for the soft humming of machinery and the distant sounds of agitated creatures throughout the facility. Somewhere in that silence, a 3-year-old human child slept peacefully, completely unaware that her simple existence was forcing an entire galaxy to confront its most fundamental fears about the nature of consciousness, love, and the terrible beauty of a species that had weaponized compassion itself. 3 days after the human child's arrival, Xenological Research Station Epsilon 7 had become the most monitored facility in the galaxy. Representatives from 12 major species had arrived to observe what the Galactic Council was calling the Emma Incident, named after the small human who had somehow learned to speak her own name despite having no memory of her origins. Dr. Crixtal stood before a room filled with some of the most powerful beings in known space, trying to explain something that defied every established principle of xenobiology. The holographic display behind her showed a peaceful scene, 3-year-old Emma Chen playing with a group of adult humans who had constructed simple toys from food containers and fabric scraps. "The behavioral modifications continue to accelerate," Crixtal reported, gesturing to the display. "The humans have now created what they term a family unit with the child at its center. Despite having no genetic relationship, no cultural background in common, and no logical survival advantage to this arrangement, they have committed themselves entirely to her welfare." Ambassador Thul of the hegemony shifted his massive bulk, the crystalline formations on his carapace catching the room's light. His species had fought 3 wars against humanity and lost all of them. "Dr. Crixtal, we understand that human pack bonding is unusual. What we need to know is why this single child is causing system-wide instabilities." Crixtal activated another display, showing data streams from throughout the facility. "The child's presence has triggered responses in 847 different species across 17 sections. Aggressive predators have become docile. Hive mind species have begun exhibiting individual decision-making. And, most concerning of all, several species have begun attempting to breach containment, not to escape, but to reach the human sections." A murmur of concern rippled through the assembled delegates. General Kext of the Vraxian Empire leaned forward, his forearms clenched in what Krixtal recognized as barely controlled aggression.
Are you telling us that a human infant has somehow influenced creatures that have never had direct contact with humans?
Not influenced, Dr. Velnoon interjected from his position near the monitoring stations.
Inspired. That's the crucial distinction. The other species aren't being controlled or manipulated. They're responding to something they're witnessing. Ambassador Sythra of the collective raised one of her 6 hands.
Her species prided itself on logical thinking and emotional neutrality.
Explain.
Dr. Krixtal pulled up security footage from Section 11, where a group of stellar mantids, creatures bred specifically for combat and incapable of social bonding, were doing something unprecedented. These mantids have been in isolation for 2 years. They communicate through chemical signals and have never shown interest in other life forms.
But, look at this.
The footage showed the insectoid creatures gathered around their transparent barrier, apparently focused on something beyond their field of vision. Their antennae moved in synchronous patterns, and they had begun constructing elaborate structures from their food supplies. They're building, General Kext observed. But mantids only build combat fortifications. Look more closely, Krixtal urged.
The display zoomed in on the structures.
They were clearly not defensive positions. Instead, the mantids had created what could only be described as toys, colorful, soft shapes that served no tactical purpose. They're making gifts, Ambassador Thul said, his voice filled with disbelief.
Combat-bred insectoids are crafting presents for a creature they've never seen.
The phenomenon extends beyond gift-making, Dr. Velnoon added, bringing up footage from Section 15.
The Vraxian Death Warriors have begun what we can only describe as singing.
The room fell silent as the display showed 12-foot-tall killing machines arranged in a circle, producing harmonious vocalizations that their species had never been observed making.
Their voices, normally used only for battle cries and intimidation, had somehow found melody. General Kext's forearms trembled with emotion. That's impossible. Vraxians don't sing. We don't have the neural pathways for musical expression.
Apparently, you do, Dr. Krixtal replied gently.
The humans seem to be triggering dormant capabilities in species throughout the facility.
But the most significant development occurred this morning. She activated a new display, showing the human enclosure. Emma was awake, playing a simple clapping game with her adopted guardians. Her laughter echoed through the observation chamber's speakers, and several delegates physically recoiled at the sound. That noise, Ambassador Sythra said, her normally composed demeanor cracking.
What is that sound? Human children produce vocalizations when experiencing joy, Dr. Krixtal explained. They call it laughter.
And, this morning, for the first time since we began monitoring, Emma reached through the barriers of her enclosure.
The delegates leaned forward as one.
Physical contact with the containment barriers should have been impossible. The electromagnetic fields were designed to prevent exactly that kind of interaction.
The barriers didn't fail, Dr. Velnoon clarified before anyone could ask. They're still fully functional.
But, somehow, the child was able to extend her hand through the field without triggering any alarms or causing any apparent harm to herself.
Where did she reach?
General Kext demanded.
Dr. Krixtal hesitated. Section 12. The high-security containment area for the Void Hunters. The room erupted.
Void Hunters were considered one of the most dangerous species in known space, beings of living shadow that could phase through matter and existed primarily to consume other life forms. They were kept in specialized containment fields that prevented them from accessing normal spacetime.
The child made contact? Ambassador Thul asked, his voice barely controlled.
Yes. For approximately 37 seconds, Emma Chen maintained physical contact with a Void Hunter through barriers that were supposed to prevent any form of interaction.
And? Ambassador Sythra prompted. Dr. Krixtal activated the final display.
The footage showed Emma's small hand extended through the barrier, seemingly touching nothing but empty air. But enhanced sensors revealed the truth: a Void Hunter had materialized just enough to meet her touch, its form solidifying around her fingers. The Void Hunter experienced what it later described, through unprecedented vocal communication, as warmth, Dr. Velnoon reported. It told us, and, I quote, "The small bright one showed me colors I did not know existed in the dark."
Void Hunters can't speak, General Kext protested. They don't have vocal cords or linguistic capabilities.
They do now, Dr. Crickstow replied.
The contact with Emma has apparently activated dormant neural pathways in the creature's consciousness.
It's been communicating constantly since the incident, primarily asking questions about the small bright one and requesting permission to keep her safe from the darkness.
The implications hung heavy in the air. If a 3-year-old human could somehow activate unused potential in other species, what did that mean for the galaxy's understanding of consciousness itself? Ambassador Thul was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. Dr. Crickstow, are you suggesting that human children possess some form of consciousness-altering ability?
Not altering, she corrected.
Awakening.
Every species we've observed has shown capabilities they possessed but had never accessed. Emma isn't changing them, she's helping them become more than they were.
How? Ambassador Sythra demanded.
Dr. Velnoon stepped forward. We believe it's connected to what humans call innocence.
Emma has no preconceptions about what other species can or cannot do. She approaches every interaction with complete openness and genuine curiosity.
And, somehow, that expectation of goodness seems to manifest.
That's scientifically impossible, General Kext declared.
So is everything else we've observed in the past 3 days, Dr. Crickstow replied.
But, the evidence is overwhelming.
Human children, particularly those in their early developmental stages, appear to possess an ability to recognize and nurture potential in other conscious beings. She gestured to a comprehensive data display. In 72 hours, we've documented 17 species developing new capabilities, 43 instances of unprecedented interspecies communication attempts, and over 200 behavioral modifications that suggest increased emotional range and empathetic response.
All because of one child? Ambassador Thul asked.
All because of how one child sees the universe, Dr.
Velnoon corrected.
Emma looks at a void hunter and sees someone who might be lonely.
She looks at a stellar mantid and sees someone who might want to play.
She doesn't see monsters or weapons or threats, she sees potential friends. And that perception somehow becomes reality, Dr. Crickstow added. We're witnessing what appears to be consciousness-level transformation triggered by exposure to human childlike wonder.
General Kext stood, his massive frame towering over the assembled delegates. If this is true, if human children can somehow improve other species, what does that mean for our understanding of the human threat level?
The question hung in the air like a physical weight.
For generations, the galaxy had feared human military might, human technological innovation, human strategic thinking.
But this was something else entirely. This was the discovery that humanity's true power might lie not in their ability to destroy, but in their capacity to nurture. It means, Dr. Crickstow said slowly, that we've been asking the wrong questions. We've been trying to understand how to fight humans, when we should have been trying to understand how to learn from them.
Ambassador Sythra activated her communication device. I'm calling for an emergency session of the Galactic Council. This information changes everything. What do we do about the child? General Kext asked.
Dr. Crickstow looked back at the display, where Emma was now sleeping peacefully surrounded by her human guardians, completely unaware that her innocent existence was reshaping the galaxy's understanding of consciousness itself. We protect her, she said simply. Because if we've learned anything from this experience, it's that Emma Chen might be the most important being in the galaxy. Not because she's dangerous, but because she's showing us what we could all become.
And the other species? The ones showing these new capabilities? Ambassador Thul inquired.
Dr. Velnoon smiled, an expression that seemed strange on his usually stern features.
We let them keep singing. We let them keep building. We let them keep discovering parts of themselves they never knew existed. Because, Dr.
Crickstow added, watching as the Void Hunter from Section 12 materialized just enough to place what might have been a shadowy flower near Emma's sleeping area, sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe is the possibility that everyone might actually be better than they appear. The meeting ended in thoughtful silence, but, throughout the facility, the sounds of transformation continued.
Species that had never shown creativity were composing poetry. Beings bred for combat were learning to dance.
And, in the center of it all, a 3-year-old human child slept peacefully, dreaming of a universe where everyone was exactly as wonderful as she believed them to be. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the vast chambers of Station Omega Prime, where representatives from over 300 species gathered to address what many were calling the most significant discovery in galactic history. The debate had raged for 6 hours, with no clear resolution in sight.
Dr.
Crixtal stood at the central podium, fielding increasingly aggressive questions about the Emma incident while trying to explain phenomena that challenged every fundamental assumption about consciousness, evolution, and the nature of intelligence itself. Dr. Crixtal, Boon Chancellor Vorth of the Titan Collective, his massive form casting shadows across the assembly floor. You're asking us to believe that a single human child has somehow awakened dormant capabilities in hundreds of different species.
This sounds more like primitive mythology than scientific observation.
Chancellor Vorth, I understand your skepticism, Crixtal replied, activating a holographic display that showed real-time feeds from Epsilon 7. But, the evidence is overwhelming and continues to expand. As of this morning, we've documented capability emergence in over 900 species across 23 sections of the facility.
The display showed a breathtaking array of unprecedented behaviors. Hive minds were expressing individual creativity.
Species that had evolved without artistic capability were creating elaborate sculptures.
Beings that had never shown interest in music were composing symphonies.
This is what we call the Emma effect, Dr. Velnoon added from his position at the secondary podium. Named for the child whose presence triggered these transformations. But, we're beginning to understand that Emma herself isn't causing these changes directly. Senator Kylth of the Wisdom Seekers raised her crystalline appendage.
Explain the distinction. Emma's unique capability appears to be her absolute lack of preconceptions about what other beings can or cannot do, Crixtal explained.
When she looks at a creature, she sees not what it is, but what it could become. And, somehow, that perception creates a resonance effect that allows dormant neural pathways to activate. You're describing consciousness-level telepathy, protested Admiral Zan of the Solar Federation.
Humans don't possess psychic abilities. Not telepathy, Dr. Velnoon corrected.
Something far more subtle and, potentially more powerful.
Emma doesn't read minds or project thoughts.
She simply expects the best from everyone she encounters. And, that expectation somehow becomes a catalyst for self-discovery.
The assembly murmured with unease. The implications were staggering. If human children could somehow inspire other species to transcend their apparent limitations, what did that mean for the established order of galactic society? Chancellor Vorth gestured toward the display.
Show us the most recent developments. Dr. Crixtal activated a new feed, this one showing Section 19, which housed the facility's most dangerous specimens. This morning, Emma managed to extend her influence to creatures we thought were completely beyond reach. The entropy devourers in Section 19 have begun producing what they call memory flowers, crystalline structures that preserve positive experiences rather than consuming them. The feed showed beings of living darkness tending to gardens of light, their forms more solid and defined than anyone had ever observed. The entropy devourers had been classified as forces of pure destruction, existing only to unmake organized matter and energy. Yet here they were, creating rather than destroying.
They're still dangerous, Dr. Crixtal clarified quickly.
But, they've discovered that creation requires the same energy as destruction, and they've chosen to experiment with building rather than unmaking.
What about the Void Hunters? Senator Kylth asked. Your previous reports mentioned unprecedented communication. Dr. Velnoon activated another display.
The Void Hunter that made contact with Emma has undergone the most dramatic transformation. It's developed what it calls perspective shifting, the ability to experience reality from multiple dimensional viewpoints simultaneously.
It's begun serving as a translator between species that exist in different phases of spacetime.
The feed showed the shadowy being interacting with creatures from various dimensions, somehow facilitating communication between beings that had previously existed in complete isolation. The Void Hunter had become a bridge between realities. But, the most significant development, Dr. Crixtal continued, occurred just 6 hours ago. The assembly fell silent as she activated a feed from the human enclosure. Emma was awake, sitting in the center of the space, but she was no longer alone. Somehow, representatives from over a dozen different species had found ways to join her, despite the supposedly impenetrable barriers between sections.
How is this possible? Admiral Zan demanded.
Those barriers are designed to contain beings capable of manipulating spacetime itself. They didn't break the barriers, Dr. Velnoon explained.
They transcended them.
Each species has discovered capabilities that allow them to exist partially outside their normal dimensional constraints. The stellar mantids learned to phase shift. The crystalline entities developed temporal displacement. The void hunters can now selectively materialize in multiple locations. They're all sitting together, Senator KYLTH observed, her voice filled with wonder. Species that have been mortal enemies for millennia, sharing the same space peacefully. The display showed Emma at the center of an impossible gathering. Creatures of living shadow sat beside beings of pure light. Mechanical intelligences communicated with organic hive minds. Species that existed in different dimensions were somehow occupying the same space without conflict. How is she doing this? Chancellor Vorth asked, his skepticism giving way to genuine curiosity. We believe Emma has discovered something that we've all forgotten, Dr. Crickstal said, her voice quiet but clear. She's remembered that consciousness is fundamentally collaborative. Every sentient being in that enclosure is contributing something unique to the collective experience, and Emma's presence somehow makes that sharing possible. She's not controlling them or manipulating them, Dr. Velnoon added. She's simply creating a space where every being can be their best possible self. And, when that happens, apparently the limitations we thought were absolute, aren't. The assembly watched in fascination as Emma began what appeared to be a simple children's game, clapping her hands in a rhythmic pattern. One by one, the other creatures began participating, each contributing their own unique interpretation of rhythm and melody. The result was a harmony that seemed to resonate across multiple dimensional frequencies. The acoustic analysis is remarkable, Dr. Crickstal noted. They're creating music that exists simultaneously in 17 different dimensional phases. Beings that shouldn't be able to perceive each other's existence are somehow collaborating on a level we've never documented. What does Emma think about all this? Senator KYLTH asked. Dr. Velnoon smiled, an expression that was becoming more common among the research staff. She thinks she's playing with her friends. When we asked her about the different creatures, she said, and, I quote, they're all just like me inside. Some of them just forgot how to be happy. The simplicity of the statement hit the assembly like a physical force. A 3-year-old human had somehow diagnosed one of the fundamental problems of galactic civilization and begun addressing it through the simple act of friendship. Dr. Crickstal, Admiral Zahn said slowly, what are the security implications of these developments? That's what we need to discuss, she replied, her expression growing serious. Emma's influence is expanding. The creatures that have been transformed by their contact with her are beginning to communicate with specimens in other facilities. We're receiving reports of similar phenomena at research stations throughout the galaxy. Similar how? Chancellor Vorth demanded. Species that have never shown creativity are suddenly developing art. Beings bred for combat are discovering music. Hive minds are expressing individual thoughts. The pattern is spreading. Dr. Velnoon activated a galactic map showing the locations of xenological research facilities. Red indicators marked stations reporting unusual activity, and the pattern was expanding outward from Epsilon 7 like ripples in a pond. We estimate that within 6 months, every research facility in the galaxy will be experiencing some form of the Emma effect, he reported. And the implications extend far beyond our research stations. Explain, Senator KYLTH requested. If consciousness is truly as malleable as Emma is demonstrating, if beings can transcend their apparent limitations through simple exposure to unconditional acceptance, then our entire understanding of species classification, military capability assessment, and diplomatic relations needs to be reconsidered. The assembly sat in stunned silence as the full implications sank in. For millennia, galactic society had been built on the assumption that species were limited by their evolutionary biology, their cultural development, and their technological capabilities. But, if a human child could inspire beings to transcend those limitations, what do you recommend? Chancellor Vorth asked finally. Dr. Crickstal looked back at the display, where Emma was now teaching a void hunter how to make flower chains from the crystalline growths produced by the entropy devourers. I recommend that we stop thinking of this as a research project and start thinking of it as an educational opportunity. You're suggesting we learn from the child? Admiral Zahn asked. I'm suggesting we learn from what the child is teaching us about ourselves, she corrected. Every species in that enclosure has discovered capabilities they never knew they possessed. And they discovered those capabilities not through training or genetic modification or technological enhancement, but through simple acceptance and encouragement. Dr. Velnoon nodded.
Emma isn't changing these beings.
She's helping them remember what they were always capable of becoming. And if that's true for creatures we've classified as monsters, weapons, and forces of destruction, then it might be true for all of us, Senator KYLTH finished, her voice filled with something that might have been hope. The debate continued for hours, but the tone had shifted. Instead of discussing containment and security, the conversation turned to possibilities and potential. For the first time in galactic history, representatives from hundreds of species were seriously discussing the idea that consciousness itself might be far more flexible and beautiful than anyone had dared to imagine. And, in a small enclosure on a distant research station, a 3-year-old human child continued to play with her friends, completely unaware that she was teaching the galaxy how to remember what it meant to dream. 2 weeks after the Galactic Council's emergency session, the universe had begun to change in ways that no one could have predicted. Reports flooded in from across known space as the Emma effect spread beyond research facilities and into civilian populations. What had started as an anomaly in a single station was becoming a transformation that touched every corner of galactic civilization. Dr. Crixtal stood in the newly constructed observation amphitheater at Epsilon 7, watching as delegates from 300 species gathered to witness something unprecedented. The facility had been completely redesigned, not as a prison, but as a meeting place where beings could safely interact across dimensional and biological barriers. Status report requested Ambassador Thul, who had become the unofficial coordinator of what was now being called the Consciousness Initiative. His crystalline carapace reflected the soft light emanating from the assembled creatures, creating patterns that seemed to shift with his emotions. The transformation continues to accelerate, Dr. Crixtal reported. We now have documented cases of capability emergence in over 6,000 species across 47 star systems. And the pattern is consistent: beings are discovering abilities they always possessed but never accessed. She activated a holographic display that showed real-time feeds from various locations throughout the galaxy. On Zirion Prime, a species of living crystals that had existed in perfect isolation for millions of years had begun resonating in harmony, creating music that could be felt across entire continents. In the Spiral Nebula, mechanical intelligences that had never shown interest in biological life were collaborating with organic species to create hybrid artworks that existed simultaneously in digital and physical space. But the most significant development, Dr. Velnoon added, is happening right here.
The amphitheater's central viewing area lit up, revealing the transformed environment where Emma spent her days.
What had once been a sterile containment facility now resembled a fantastic garden where impossible things happened as naturally as breathing. Emma, now 4 years old after the passage of Galactic Standard Time, sat at the center of a circle that included beings from 17 different dimensions. She was leading what appeared to be a teaching session, using simple blocks and shapes to demonstrate concepts that were causing revolutionary breakthroughs in physics, philosophy, and consciousness studies throughout the galaxy. Today she's explaining temporal causality, Dr. Velnoon noted with the kind of casual tone usually reserved for discussing weather.
Yesterday it was dimensional mathematics.
Last week she taught a group of entropy devourers how to create stable matter from pure chaos.
She's 4, Ambassador SITHRA protested, though her voice carried wonder rather than disbelief. How is she understanding concepts that our greatest minds struggle with? She isn't understanding them, Dr. Crixtal clarified. She's experiencing them. Emma doesn't think about theoretical physics, she plays with it. She doesn't study consciousness, she demonstrates it.
And, somehow, that direct experiential approach is teaching everyone around her to do the same. The display focused on Emma as she picked up a simple wooden block. In her hands, the block began to shift, not physically, but conceptually. The assembled beings watched as she demonstrated how the same object could exist as matter, energy, thought, and possibility simultaneously. The implications for our understanding of reality itself are staggering, Dr. Velnoon continued. Emma is showing us that the boundaries we've accepted as absolute between matter and energy, between individual and collective consciousness, between possibility and actuality, are far more fluid than we ever imagined. General Kext, who had become one of Emma's most devoted observers, leaned forward.
But, how is this affecting the greater galaxy? You mentioned reports from civilian populations.
Dr. Crixtal activated a new display showing population centers throughout known space.
The effect is spreading through normal social contact.
Beings who interact with those who have experienced the Emma effect begin manifesting similar capability expansions. We're seeing entire cities discovering new forms of art, new methods of communication, new approaches to problem solving.
And there's been no increase in conflict? Ambassador Thul asked. No violence or territorial disputes as a result of these capability changes?
Quite the opposite, Dr. Velnoon replied.
Violent incidents have decreased by 73% in affected areas.
When beings discover their expanded capabilities, they also seem to develop enhanced empathy and collaborative instincts. The display showed footage from various worlds where traditional enemies were working together on projects that would have been impossible weeks earlier. On the war-torn border between the hegemony and the Solar Federation, formerly hostile species were collaborating to create art installations that told stories from multiple perspectives simultaneously. It's as if discovering their own hidden potential makes beings more aware of the potential in others, Dr. Krikstal observed.
Emma's gift isn't just individual transformation, it's the recognition that consciousness itself is inherently collaborative. Dr. Krikstal, came a new voice from the assembly.
Dr. Krikstal turned to see Commander Yeshka of the Void Fleet, a species that had remained in isolation for millennia due to their ability to accidentally unmake reality through careless thought.
We've received reports that some of our deepest scouts are beginning to stabilize. The significance of this statement hit the amphitheater like a shockwave.
The Void Fleet existed in a state of controlled isolation because their consciousness was too powerful for normal spacetime.
If they were beginning to stabilize. Commander Yeshka, are you saying that your people are finding ways to interact with normal reality without causing dimensional collapse? Dr. Velnoon asked.
More than that, Commander Yeshka replied, her form flickering between dimensions as she spoke.
We're discovering that reality is much more resilient than we believed.
Our scouts report that they can now exist in normal spacetime without destabilization, but only when they approach reality with the same innocence that the human child demonstrates. Emma's laughter echoed through the amphitheater speakers as she played a game with a group of beings that existed as living equations. The mathematical entities were learning to express emotion through numerical relationships, while Emma was casually manipulating probability curves with the same unconscious ease that other children might arrange toys. She's teaching them that reality is meant to be playful, Dr. Krikstal realized.
For Emma, the universe isn't a collection of laws and limitations to be obeyed, it's a playground to be explored.
And that perspective is contagious, Ambassador Sythra added. Beings who learn to see reality as collaborative and responsive rather than fixed and constraining are discovering capabilities they never knew they possessed. The display shifted to show a wider view of the facility, revealing something that still took Krikstal's breath away. The barriers between sections had become irrelevant. Species that had been kept in maximum isolation were now freely moving between areas, their expanded consciousness allowing them to exist safely in environments that should have been lethal.
The containment protocols are now purely voluntary, Dr. Velnoon explained to the newer delegates.
Every being here could leave at any time, but they choose to stay because this environment allows them to explore their capabilities in ways that aren't possible in normal space. They're staying to learn, General Kext observed.
Not from us, but from each other. And from Emma. What has Emma said about all this? Ambassador Thul asked. Does she understand what she's accomplishing?
Dr. Krikstal smiled, an expression that had become common among the research staff.
We asked her yesterday.
She said, everyone was already wonderful.
I just reminded them to remember.
The simplicity of the statement carried profound implications. If Emma was right, if every conscious being already possessed the capabilities they were now discovering, then consciousness itself was far more magnificent than anyone had ever dared to believe.
Dr. Krikstal, Commander Yeshka said slowly, my people have a question. Would it be possible, could Emma visit the Void Territories? We believe her presence might allow us to fully manifest in normal reality for the first time in our species' history. The request stunned the assembly into silence.
The Void Territories existed in spaces between dimensions, accessible only to beings capable of surviving the complete absence of conventional reality.
For a physical being to visit would normally be impossible.
We've considered similar requests from 17 other species, Dr. Velnoon replied.
The challenge isn't Emma's safety, we've learned that her influence creates a stability field that protects everyone around her. The challenge is logistical. How do you transport a 4-year-old human to locations that exist outside normal spacetime?
The same way she does everything else, Dr. Krikstal said suddenly, struck by inspiration. Not by conquering the obstacles, but by making them irrelevant. She activated her personal communicator.
Emma, sweetie, could you come to the speaking area for a moment?
The assembly watched in fascination as the small human girl skipped over to the communication panel, completely unaware that she was addressing representatives from hundreds of worlds.
"Hi everyone," Emma said cheerfully, waving at the camera. "Are you having fun learning new things?" Commander Yeshka flickered into greater solidity, her form stabilizing as she responded to Emma's direct address. "Hello, Emma. We were wondering if you might like to visit our home. But, our home is in a place that's very different from here." "Different how?" Emma asked with genuine curiosity. "It exists in the spaces between realities. Most beings can't survive there."
Emma tilted her head thoughtfully.
"Oh.
You mean the quiet places?"
"I know about those. Sometimes I visit them when I'm dreaming. They're not scary, they're just sleeping." The casual way she discussed transdimensional travel left the assembly speechless. Emma talked about moving between realities the way other children might discuss visiting a friend's house. "Would you like to show your friends the quiet places?" Commander Yeshka asked gently. "Sure," Emma replied enthusiastically. "But, we should bring snacks. Exploring makes you hungry." As Emma skipped back to her friends, the amphitheater remained silent for several moments.
Finally, Ambassador Thul spoke. "I believe we're witnessing the emergence of something entirely new," he said quietly. "Not just individual transformation, but the birth of a new form of existence. One where consciousness isn't limited by the boundaries we've always accepted as absolute."
"And Emma is showing us the way," Dr. Krixtal added.
"Not through force or manipulation, but through the simple act of believing that everything is possible if approached with enough love and wonder." The session ended with delegates from across the galaxy making plans to introduce the Emma effect to their home worlds. But, in the transformed environment of Epsilon 7, a 4-year-old human girl continued to play with her friends, teaching the universe that the only limitations that truly mattered were the ones you chose to accept. 6 months later, the term research station no longer accurately described what Epsilon 7 had become. The facility now served as the first interdimensional embassy in galactic history, where beings from across reality's spectrum gathered not as subjects of study, but as collaborators in the greatest discovery ever made, that consciousness itself was infinite in its possibilities. Dr. Krixtal walked through corridors that shifted gently between dimensions, accommodating visitors who existed in different phases of reality. What had once been sterile metal walls were now living surfaces that displayed art created collaboratively by species who had never been able to communicate before Emma's arrival. "Final status report," she announced to the assembled delegates in the Grand Amphitheater, a space that existed simultaneously in 17 different dimensional frequencies. Today marked the official conclusion of what had started as a security assessment and had become the foundation for a new era of galactic civilization. "The Emma effect has now been documented in every known star system," Dr. Velnoon reported from his position at the quantum podium, his form flickering slightly as he existed across multiple realities to address beings who couldn't all perceive the same dimensional layer. "Conservative estimates suggest that over 90% of conscious beings in the galaxy have now experienced some form of capability expansion." The display screens, which were actually living crystalline entities that had volunteered to serve as communication interfaces, showed a galaxy transformed. War zones had become collaboration sites. Species that had existed in isolation for millennia were now active participants in galactic society. Technologies that should have been impossible were being developed by beings who had discovered that imagination was a fundamental force of reality. "And the conflicts?" asked Ambassador Thul, though his question carried hope rather than concern. "Galactic military incidents have decreased by 94%, Dr. Krixtal replied. "Not because of any peace treaties or diplomatic agreements, but because beings who have discovered their expanded capabilities find conflict uninteresting." "Uninteresting?" General Kext inquired. His species had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation, discovering that their warrior nature could be expressed through protective creativity rather than destructive violence. "When you can create entire universes of possibility," Dr. Velnoon explained, "fighting over resources or territory becomes as appealing as arguing over grains of sand when you live on an infinite beach." Emma, now approaching her 5th birthday, sat in the center of the amphitheater with a group that would have been impossible to imagine when this journey began. Void hunters played alongside entropy devourers. Crystalline entities shared jokes with biological hive minds. Mechanical intelligences created music with beings of pure thought. But Emma was no longer unique in her abilities. Throughout the galaxy, other human children were demonstrating similar gifts, and, more remarkably, children from other species were beginning to manifest comparable capabilities. The Emma effect had revealed something profound. The capacity for transcendent consciousness wasn't limited to humans, but was a potential inherent in consciousness itself. Dr. Krixtal, came a harmonious voice from the collective unity, a new alliance of species that had learned to share consciousness while maintaining individual identity. We have completed the analysis you requested regarding the nature of Emma's original influence.
And your conclusions?
Emma never possessed any ability that other beings lacked, the Unity replied, their collective voice carrying the weight of millions of integrated perspectives. Her gift was simply the absence of belief in limitations. She approached every interaction with complete openness to possibility, and that openness became a catalyst for others to abandon their own limiting beliefs.
The implications were staggering in their simplicity.
Emma hadn't changed the universe, she had simply refused to accept that it couldn't be changed.
You're saying that consciousness has always been capable of these expansions? Ambassador Sythara asked.
We're saying that consciousness is expansion, Dr. Velnoon replied. What we've learned is that awareness itself is infinitely creative. The limitations we accepted as absolute were simply habits of thought, not laws of reality. Emma looked up from her game and skipped over to the communication area, a routine that had become beloved by beings across the galaxy who tuned into the embassy's broadcasts. Hi everyone, she said cheerfully, her voice now translated simultaneously into over 3,000 forms of communication. We learned something really fun today.
What did you learn, Emma?
Dr. Krixtal asked, though she suspected the answer would reshape their understanding of physics yet again. We learned that if you love something enough, it starts to love you back, Emma announced with the matter-of-fact tone that children use for self-evident truths. And then, everything gets easier because you're working together instead of trying to make things happen by yourself.
The statement hit the assembly like a revelation.
Emma had just described what appeared to be a fundamental principle of reality, that consciousness was inherently relational, and that love, genuine care and appreciation was not just an emotion but a force that could influence the basic structure of existence itself. Can you show us what you mean? Asked Commander Yeshka, whose species had successfully learned to exist permanently in normal spacetime, creating the first truly interdimensional civilization. Emma picked up what appeared to be a simple stone, one of the few objects that remained from the original research facility. In her hands, the stone began to change, not physically, but conceptually. It started to glow with an inner light, then began to sing, then became transparent, revealing intricate patterns of meaning that existed within its structure. I told the stone that it was beautiful, Emma explained. And then, it remembered how to be beautiful. It was always beautiful, but it forgot for a while. The assembled beings watched in wonder as the stone continued its transformation, becoming a living mandala that told the story of its formation, its journey through space and time, and its dreams of what it might become.
Emma, Dr. Krixtal said gently, can you teach us how to talk to things the way you do?
You already know how, Emma replied with a smile. You just have to remember that everything is alive in some way, and everything wants to be loved.
When you remember that, everything starts talking back.
The truth was so simple it was revolutionary. Emma wasn't demonstrating special powers, she was showing them how to recognize the consciousness that existed in all things, and how to engage with that consciousness through love rather than control. Dr. Krixtal, Ambassador Thol said quietly, I believe we need to revise our original assessment.
Oh?
We classified humans as the galaxy's most dangerous predator because we feared their capacity for destruction. But we were wrong about what made them dangerous.
Dr. Velnoon nodded in understanding.
They're dangerous because they refuse to accept that anything is impossible. They look at the universe and see infinite potential for beauty, growth, and connection. And that vision is so compelling that it transforms everything they touch. More than that, Dr. Krixtal added, watching as Emma began teaching her friends how to sing with colors and paint with music.
Humans are dangerous because they make everyone around them more than they were before.
They don't conquer, they inspire.
They don't dominate, they elevate.
The session was interrupted by an announcement from the facility's new consciousness. The building itself had awakened during the transformations and now served as an active participant in the community rather than merely a container. Attention, friends, the facility announced in its warm, architectural voice.
We have visitors approaching from the Andromeda Galaxy.
They say they've heard about something called the human effect and would like to learn about consciousness expansion.
Emma clapped her hands excitedly. New friends. We should make welcome signs.
As beings throughout the facility began preparing for their intergalactic guests, Dr. Krixtal realized that they had witnessed the beginning of something unprecedented in cosmic history, the emergence of a truly universal consciousness, one that embraced all forms of awareness and recognized the infinite potential inherent in existence itself. Final assessment, she said to Dr. Velnoon as they watched Emma organize a welcome committee that included beings from dimensions they hadn't even known existed. Humans are indeed the galaxy's most dangerous predator, Dr. Velnoon agreed. But not because they destroy, because they love so completely that they transform everything they encounter into the best possible version of itself. And, now that gift is spreading beyond humanity, Dr. Krixtal observed.
Emma didn't just teach us about humans, she taught us about consciousness itself.
As the first ships from Andromeda began appearing in local space, drawn by reports of impossible transformations and infinite possibility, Emma Chen, the little girl who had reached through barriers that were supposed to contain the universe's most dangerous beings, continued to play with her friends, teaching them that love was not just an emotion, but the fundamental creative force of existence. And, across the galaxy, in dimensions both known and yet to be discovered, consciousness itself began to remember what it had always been capable of becoming. The zoo's warnings had been correct after all.
Humans were the most dangerous predators in the universe.
But their prey was limitation itself, and their weapon was a 4-year-old child's absolute certainty that everything and everyone was capable of being wonderful. In the end, that turned out to be the most dangerous belief of all, the simple, revolutionary idea that love could transform the universe itself, one consciousness at a time.